Welcome to to the last class, class number 11. We'll start with a short mandala offering. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niratayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni E Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni E Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muni E Soha.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. And as usual, we'll do a meditation on something that we looked at last week so that you can have a little more understanding of how to relate to it, how to bring it into your life. So first of all, let's get comfortable. So check your body. See if you notice any tension anywhere in your body. And if you do your best to let go of that tension. Let it melt, flow away, dissolve into space or sink into the earth. So let your body be as relaxed as possible, free of tension. But it's also good when we're meditating to try to sit up straight if you're able to do that without too much difficulty. You can have your eyes closed or left open a little bit, allowing some light to come into your vision, which can help you to stay awake and alert during the meditation. And check your mind if there are any thoughts buzzing around in your mind. Maybe you're still thinking about something you did earlier today, or something you have to do later tonight or tomorrow. So, in other words, any thoughts of the past or of the future. It's best to put those aside. You can always pick them up again later. But when we meditate, we should really try to keep our mind focused in the here and now and on whatever topic we're meditating on. So if your mind is busy thinking about other things, a helpful way to settle it down is to be aware of the breathing coming in and going out. I can do that for a few moments. And then for our motivation for doing this meditation as well as being here for this class, bring into your mind, into your heart, an altruistic intention that could be full-fledged bodhicitta, wanting to become a Buddha for the benefit of all living beings. Or if that seems too big, hard, far away, then another altruistic intention would be just wanting to benefit others as much as you can in your life and not harm them, and therefore wanting to learn what you can from meditation and from teachings that will help you be more helpful to others. Okay, so for the meditation, let's do a meditation on faith. So last week, as we were going through the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, there was one group of those called the 5 powers, and following that, a group called the 5 strengths. And each of those groups has the same qualities, the same items. It's just that in the case of the powers, they're strong, but still have some limitations. But then with the strengths, those same 5 qualities increase and are able to overcome their opposite states of mind. So I thought we could do a meditation on the first of these 5 qualities, which is, one of the 5 faiths, one of the 5 powers and one of the 5 strengths, and that is, the quality of faith. So faith which could also be called conviction or trust, if you prefer those terms. It's one of the virtuous mental factors. It's virtuous by nature. So that means that when it comes up in our mind becomes virtuous. And any action we do, motivated by faith, becomes a virtuous action, good karma, a cause of happiness and good experiences, all the way up to enlightenment. So faith is a very important quality to have on the spiritual path. So bring to mind some of your early experiences of learning about Buddhism. May have been reading books or meeting teachers and listening to teachings, or meeting practitioners, students of Dharma that you found really inspiring. So what was it that got you interested in Buddhism, the Buddhist path? So your faith in the Buddha and his teachings, the three jewels, started to grow during those experiences. And the fact that you're still here wanting to learn about Buddhism shows that you have been sustained by faith all this time. Of course, it's only natural that there are times when our faith lags and maybe we have doubts coming up. We're not sure if this is really what we want to do, if it's the right path for us. So even bodhisattvas who are on the path of preparation and below that can still have a lack of faith and doubts coming up when they're not in meditation. And so if that can happen to them, it's not surprising that it would happen to us. We shouldn't feel bad or ashamed. Every state of mind, faith, doubt, and so on, are impermanent. They don't last, they're not always there in the mind, but they come and go, arise and pass because of various causes and conditions. And so it's understandable. Sometimes we have faith, sometimes we don't, sometimes we may even have doubt. But if we create the causes and conditions to increase our faith and work on overcoming doubt, then we'll see that our mind changes and we'll have more faith and less doubt. So one cause of faith is learning, increasing our knowledge about the Dharma and practicing it, putting the Dharma teachings into practice. And as we do that, as we learn more, as we practice more, we'll see the benefit of the Dharma, how helpful it is for us and for others, and how it explains so many useful things like how to work on our mind, how to transform our mind in positive ways. So through this learning and practicing, our faith will grow. We'll have greater certainty, greater conviction in the Buddhist teachings and the Buddhist path. And so if we do work on increasing our faith and making it stronger, more stable, eventually it becomes the power of faith. And the power of faith is a particularly strong form of faith that is able to overcome the opposite state of mind, a lack of faith and doubt. And we get to the point where, as long as we're in meditation, when we're in meditation, doubt will not arise. Our mind will always be in a state of faith, certainty about the teachings and about the practices we're doing. But outside of meditation, when we're not meditating, it's still possible for doubt, lack of faith to arise. But as we continue to work on developing our faith, it eventually becomes the strength of faith. This is a stronger form of faith that is able to completely subdue its opposite state of mind, the lack of faith, so that it doesn't arise in our mind anytime, whether we're in meditation or out of meditation. Let's try to imagine what that would be like to have such strong faith. Even if you met a person who followed another religion and was maybe very anti-Buddhist, and they talk to you, they have a lot of words, and they talk to you in a very energetic way, and they're maybe very charismatic as well, and present a lot of reasons why you are wrong, your belief in Buddhism, your Buddhist beliefs are wrong, and why their views are right. But even if you met such a person and listened to his or her talk, your mind would not be shaken, would not be affected. It would remain calm and stable. And this is because your faith is a very stable form of faith. It's faith born from learning and contemplation and analyzing, investigating. And so you're really convinced about the Buddha's teachings, and nothing would shake you from that. Just try to imagine what that would be like. So if we continue practicing, following the path, we will have that experience one day, that very strong and stable faith. So see if you can conclude this meditation by generating the determination to continue cultivating virtuous states of mind like faith, by seeing the great benefit they bring both to yourself and all other beings. Okay. So we have been going through the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, and these are various practices, various qualities that need to be developed by anyone who wants to attain full enlightenment, Buddhahood, becoming a Buddha, but they're also practiced by those who want to attain nirvana, liberation from samsara. So there are essential qualities for that, but they're also very beneficial for our happiness and well-being here and now. So last week, so we have been looking at different groups of the 37 harmonies, and there's 7 groups with different numbers of items in them. And so last week we started looking at the 6th out of the 7 groups, and this group is called the 7 branches of enlightenment, or another way it's translated is awakening factors. I'm going to use that one because it's shorter, fewer syllables to say. So the 7 awakening factors. And so these are attained only on the path of seeing. That's the point where you have a direct realization of emptiness and become an Arya. But we still develop them before that. We have to work on cultivating these 7 factors, from the beginning of our practice. And then when they become awakening factors, then that's on the path of seeing. So the reason they're called awakening factors is because they're causes for enlightenment or awakening, Buddhahood, whatever you want to call it. So here's the list of the 7. We just started looking at this last week, but didn't have a chance to go into them. So I'll do that tonight. So there are mindfulness, investigation, effort or energy, joy, pliancy, concentration, and equanimity. Okay, so there's a bit more information on the following slides. We'll go through these one by one. Okay, so mindfulness awakening factor. So this term mindfulness we've encountered many times before, and so it's included in many of the 37 harmonies, but at different levels and at different strengths. So right from the beginning of developing the 37 harmonies, one has been cultivating mindfulness. For example, with the 4 establishments of mindfulness, the 4 close placements of mindfulness on the body, feelings, and so on. So there one is cultivating mindfulness. And then it continues to develop as one progresses along the path. So when it is strong and continuous, it becomes the mindfulness awakening factor. So AF is a short form of awakening factor. And this enables us to control the afflictions. So at this point, mindfulness is very, very strong. And so the afflictions are, even though they're not completely abandoned, they're still there in the mind, but they're very much under control so that they're not popping up in the mind without any choice or control. And so with this mindfulness awakening factor, the mind is thoroughly familiar with the four truths and can remain focused on them without being distracted by other objects. So, yeah, it can be helpful to try to imagine what that would be like. I think we all do try to meditate sometimes, but we probably find it very difficult to keep our mind focused on our meditation object. Keeps getting distracted elsewhere. But here at this point, if you decide to sit down and meditate on the Four Noble Truths, then because you've been meditating on them a lot, and you're really, really strongly familiar with them. And so when you sit down and meditate on the Four Noble Truths, then you're able to keep your mind focused on them as long as you want without being distracted and thinking about other things like movies, food, your job, your partner, your kids, and so on. So one day we'll be able to do that, but that's probably beyond possibility right now. Okay, then the second is the investigation awakening factor. So this is explained that with strong mindfulness, we investigate our body and mind and gain wisdom that knows what to cultivate and abandon. So this awakening factor directly realizes selflessness and thus destroys obscurations. So investigation is also something that that you start doing early on in the path, because the Buddha said that we shouldn't just blindly believe his teachings, but we need to investigate them. We need to check for ourselves to see if what he says is true. Like, for example, the first noble truth, true suffering. So, yeah, Buddha said, he mentioned all these different experiences we have that are unsatisfactory, that are painful, that are suffering, like birth and sickness and aging and death and not getting what we want, meeting what we don't want, getting things happening to us we don't want, separating from what we cherish and want to keep with us, and so on. So those are just some examples of suffering the Buddha mentioned. There's many more. And so, yeah, the Buddha pointed out all these experiences that happen to us as human beings, but also happen to many other beings as well. And he didn't do this to make us depressed and unhappy and take away our happiness, but instead he did it to help us wake up and realize that the situation we are in as unenlightened beings is very unsatisfactory. Yeah, we just keep running into problems again and again, and we keep hoping, one day there won't be any problems, one day everything will be fine, but that just never happens in samsara. Yeah, there may be times when we don't have too many problems, things seem to go well, but sooner or later that changes, another problem comes along. That's just the nature of samsaric existence, unenlightened existence. So So this is what the Buddha taught, but we have to investigate that ourselves and see if it's true. Okay, so and yeah, all the various teachings and the various practices that we do also require a certain amount of investigation. For example, here it mentions our body and mind. So in practicing the 4 close placements of mindfulness, we look at our body and how it's made of many parts and how it's changing all the time. It doesn't stay the same from one moment to the next. And it's in a process of aging, getting older, sometimes getting sick or injured, breaking down, and sooner or later it's going to die. This body will become a corpse. So these are things we don't really like thinking about. The mind will have some resistance to it. However, it's important that we do contemplate these things so we gain an understanding of reality, how things exist, the wisdom, as it mentions here, wisdom about the true nature of things, and wisdom that understands what I need to do to free myself from suffering, what I need to overcome to free myself from suffering and attain nirvana, enlightenment. Okay, so yeah, again, investigation is something that we start doing early on in the path. And when it becomes this type of investigation, the awakening factor of investigation, that's very, very strong and knows what should be cultivated, such as concentration and wisdom, and what needs to be abandoned, like non-virtue and afflictions and so on. Yeah, so it says that, yeah, in the last line, this awakening factor directly realizes selflessness. So to be able to understand selflessness or emptiness, we have to do investigation. It's not just going to pop up in our mind one day by itself, or because we pray for it. We ask Buddha, please help me realize selflessness. We have to use investigation about how things exist, like our own self. What is this self, this I? And see if it exists the way it appears or not. And eventually we'll reach this point of having a direct realization of selflessness. And that's here on the path of seeing, where you have these 7 awakening factors. So that direct realization of selflessness or emptiness is the only antidote, the only thing that is able to eliminate afflictions and obscurations, the things that are kind of stuck in our mind, keeping us in samsara, preventing us from attaining enlightenment. So this is the kind of weapon that will enable us to eliminate all those afflictions and obscurations. Okay, then the next, number 3, is called the effort awakening factor. And so these kind of go in a procedure, like with mindfulness. Yeah, the first one, mindfulness. Then based on that, we are able to generate investigation. We can have this mental quality of investigating things that we are focusing on in our meditation. And then that in turn leads to this next awakening factor of effort. So it says, with refined discrimination of virtuous and non-virtuous mental states. Okay, so having a good understanding of which states of mind are virtuous, which ones are non-virtuous, and that we attain through investigation. One can strengthen the former and restrain the latter. So, for example, as we learn and practice the Dharma, we will come to recognize that certain mental states like anger, hatred, aversion, that That's one of the mental states that's very disturbing, disturbs our mind, and it's also one of the main factors keeping us in samsara, preventing us from attaining enlightenment, and it can lead to a lot of really harmful behavior that causes suffering to others as well. Okay, so we become, through investigation into the quality of anger, the results of anger, and so forth, we reach a point where we're totally 100% convinced that anger is something to be overcome, to be abandoned, to free ourselves from. And that's one example of a non-virtuous mental state that we want to, in the beginning, we can't completely eliminate it, but we can at least restrain ourselves from getting angry and acting it out. And then with virtuous mental states, for example, loving kindness and compassion, so we come to see that those qualities, those states of mind are really beneficial. They make us feel happy, they're beneficial for others, and they're also essential qualities for our mind to be able to progress along the path and attain higher states of mind, higher realizations. So we see lots of benefits in those states of mind, and we really want to cultivate them, strengthen them. And so this kind of certainty comes about through investigation. And then once we have that certainty, we're able to put our effort into doing just that, restraining the non-virtue and cultivating the virtue. And then it says here, with non-virtue under control, effort to practice becomes easier. So when we've, subdued our non-virtuous states of mind, our afflictive states of mind, then we have a lot more energy, and it's a lot easier to engage in meditation and other practices. And it says, this awakening factor stabilizes renunciation so that we can quickly attain enlightenment. So renunciation usually means seeing the faulty nature of samsara, cyclic existence, unenlightened existence, seeing how it's just really unpleasant and really horrible and undesirable, something we don't want to stay in but want to get free of. And so that's the meaning of renunciation of samsara, wanting to get free of it. So probably most people, when they hear some explanation of samsara, the various problems, sufferings, difficulties of samsara, they probably get a sense of renunciation. This feeling of, oh, I have to get out of this situation. I don't want to stay here anymore. But that kind of feeling might just come in spurts when we're listening to teachings or reading books or meditating on like true sufferings and so on. But then it may not be very strong or stable, because one reason is our old habitual tendencies of seeing samsara and samsaric experiences as enjoyable, as pleasurable, as desirable. Those are so strong in us that they will keep coming back. We'll see things, we'll hear things, we'll think about things that will trigger our attachment, our desire. And then our renunciation kind of goes out the window. It wasn't really that strong to begin with. So, but that's not it's not a lost cause. We just have to keep working on it, cultivating the causes for renunciation, overcoming the opposite states of mind. So eventually, like it says here, at this point of having this effort awakening factor, it stabilizes renunciation. Renunciation becomes strong and stable, so we can quickly attain enlightenment. We can quickly engage in the practices that will enable us to get free really free and attain liberation and enlightenment. Okay, number 4 is the joy awakening factor. And this arises based on the previous factors. So it says, as effort flows more easily, the mind becomes focused, more pure, and joyful. This awakening factor keeps the mind always happy, benefiting both body and mind. So because we've been making a lot of effort to practice, to subdue, overcome our afflictive, non-virtuous states of mind and increase the positive, virtuous states of mind, then joy arises, because afflictions like anger and greed and jealousy and so on, they're very unpleasant. When they arise in our mind is very disturbed, unhappy. It's not joyful at all. Those are not joyful mental states. So, with getting to the point where those non-virtuous, afflictive mental states are subdued and under control rather than coming up and taking over our mind, then it's easy to feel joyful. So this is something we might have noticed in our practice of Dharma. The more we learn and the more we practice and make positive changes in ourselves, learning to be more compassionate, more caring, less self-centered, less angry, then we might find there's more joy in our life, more happiness, the joy of Dharma. It may not always be there. Yeah, there's still times we get unhappy, angry, depressed, and so on. But I can see that for myself. When I was young, before I met Buddhism, I was a very unhappy person, very depressed most of the time, sometimes even suicidal. I was so unhappy. And so I can really see a big change and a lot more happiness. It didn't happen immediately. It did take a while practicing before I could really see that. But yeah, definitely a lot happier now than I was before. Okay, so then number 5 is the pliancy awakening factor. So it says, when joy subsides, bliss and pliancy arise. This awakening factor removes discomfort and unserviceability, so the body and mind become flexible, blissful, and capable of engaging in virtue. So the previous factor of joy, that can be a bit too much. It can make the mind kind of agitated, distracted, not so calm and peaceful. And there's also some danger of getting attached to that experience of joy. So a practitioner needs to recognize the shortcomings of joy and let go of any attachment to it, and keep bringing the mind back to the meditation object, whatever you're meditating on. And eventually joy will settle down, and then bliss arises. And this bliss is more calm and peaceful and enables the mind to settle on the object, to be content with focusing on the object. And then after this bliss comes pliancy. So pliancy is one of the 11 virtuous mental factors, and it's described as a mental factor that enables the mind to apply itself to a constructive object in whatever manner it wishes, and it dissipates any mental or physical tightness or rigidity. So you may have, if you've heard teachings on calm abiding, how to develop calm abiding, then you would have heard about pliancy there. The full experience of pliancy only comes when you have calm abiding, when you've actually attained calm abiding, then pliancy occurs at that time. So most of us probably haven't gotten to that point yet. They do say that if you're working on that practice, you're trying to develop calm abiding, you can start to have little experiences of pliancy early on. And yeah, so I don't think I can describe it from my experience, but what I understand it to be is it's a mental factor that enables your mind to keep itself on the object of meditation and virtuous objects in whatever way you want. You can use your mind in the way you want, rather than your mind being out of control and under the control of affliction. So you can decide to focus on a virtuous object, like the image of the Buddha, and your mind will just go there and stay there. Yeah, so you can, you use pliancy, or with pliancy rather, you're able to keep your mind in a virtuous state on virtuous objects, rather than being invaded by non-virtuous, disturbing thoughts and experiences. And there's also, it's physical and mental. There's physical pliancy and mental pliancy. So the mental pliancy is this ability to just keep your mind focused on whatever virtuous object you want. And physical pliancy, they say your body feels really light, like cotton. And you could do anything with your body. Only virtuous things, of course. You wouldn't want to do anything non-virtuous, but you could just decide to do something, and you've got this energy and this ability to do it with great ease. Okay. And then next is concentration. Concentration awakening factor. So it says here, pliancy deepens concentration. So with the attainment of pliancy, the previous one, it's very easy to keep your mind focused on whatever object you decide to focus on. And so your concentration increases, gets stronger, gets deeper. So this awakening factor abides single-pointedly on a chosen object of meditation, enabling us to fulfill all our wishes by developing awakened qualities. So if we decide to focus on bodhicitta, for example, we want to meditate on bodhicitta and really generate a strong experience of bodhicitta, then we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to keep our mind focused on, the methods for developing bodhicitta, and in that way we'll be able to quickly and easily develop bodhicitta. And then it says, in an Arya's continuum, it is without affliction, and when combined with wisdom, it abandons afflictions. Yeah, so anyone who wants to follow the path and reach enlightenment or nirvana has to develop concentration. It's an essential quality. We have to be able to keep our mind focused on a chosen object of meditation and not have it wander here and there. And here it's talking about an Arya. That's a person who's got the direct realization of emptiness. So they already have very, very strong concentration. But an Arya's concentration is without affliction. There's no afflictions like hatred or attachment that are mixed with it. And instead, Aryas have this incredible wisdom of the true nature of things, emptiness. And that wisdom, which they're able to keep their mind focused on, or they can stay in that state of wisdom as long as they want, then that wisdom is able to abandon affliction. So it might be difficult to tell the difference between concentration and mindfulness because both of them are about keeping the mind on an object of choice, a chosen object, and not wandering away, not being distracted. But they're not exactly the same. So mindfulness is explained as, or what it does, its function is that it remembers our object of meditation. Like if your object of meditation is the breath, then whenever you're able to remember the breath and not forget it and wander elsewhere, at those times, mindfulness is there. So it's mindfulness, the mental factor of mindfulness present in your mind that enables your mind to remember your meditation object and not forget it. And mindfulness also, stops the mind from going elsewhere, wandering elsewhere. And mindfulness is said to be the basis of concentration. So we need to have mindfulness in order to have concentration. Concentration is built on mindfulness, developed on mindfulness. So concentration is also a mental factor. And the way it's explained is that it dwells one-pointedly on a single object for a sustained period of time. That can vary, a few minutes or hours or days. But yeah, the stronger your concentration, the longer you're able to remain in meditation, single-pointedly focused on your object. And concentration is the basis for developing serenity or calm abiding and increasing wisdom. So I think concentration is a mental factor that everybody does have. Yeah, especially when we're studying, we go to school, and especially when we have to do our homework or we have to prepare for an exam, we're able to keep our mind focused, concentrated on what we are doing, or certain tasks, activities, work, hobbies, painting and so on. So people can be very focused, very concentrated on what they're doing. So we all have the ability to concentrate, but on the path, we need to develop concentration with regard to objects that will enable us to progress along the path and gain realizations. So mindfulness and concentration are kind of similar, but not exactly the same. And mindfulness is the basis for concentration. So if we have good mindfulness, then we can have concentration. But if our mindfulness slips, if we forget our object, we lose our concentration. So they kind of go hand in hand. Okay, then number 7. This is the last of the awakening factors, called equanimity. So this term equanimity doesn't always have the same meaning. There's different meanings of equanimity. For example, the 4 measurable thoughts, when we recite that prayer, the 4 measurables. So one of the 4 measurables is equanimity. And in that case, equanimity is an attitude where we are not biased or prejudiced, having some people we like and care about and want to help, and other people we dislike and don't care about, maybe even want to harm. So that's the opposite of equanimity. So equanimity is when we have equal concern and respect, consideration towards everyone. I mean, it's actually quite hard to have equanimity, but we at least try to develop it. And that's one meaning of equanimity. But here, the meaning of equanimity is something else. This is a virtuous mental factor, and it's something that arises when one has strong concentration. So in the practice of developing calm abiding, training your mind to stay focused on an object of choice, that at a certain point when your concentration gets really strong, then this mental factor of equanimity arises. And it's the opposite of an unbalanced state of mind that is affected by afflictions, attachment, aversion, jealousy, pride, all these different afflictions coming up and making your mind, unstable, imbalanced. So that's the opposite of equanimity. Equanimity is the opposite of that. Equanimity is when you're able to keep your mind in a balanced state where it's not affected by any afflictions. Okay, so here it says, as concentration deepens, equanimity becomes prominent. It observes the meditation object unwaveringly and frees the mind from faults like restlessness and laxity. So those are some of the faults that we have to deal with as we're trying to develop concentration. Restlessness is when our mind is very agitated and keeps running away from our object to things that we have liking for, attachment for. And laxity is a kind of dull state of mind. The mind kind of sinks, it's heavy, dark, dull, not bright and clear. So that's another fault. So there's various faults. We talked about these last week, I think, or the week before. So once you have learned how to manage those faults and keep them under control so they're not coming up and disturbing your mind and your concentration, then equanimity sets in. You have strong equanimity. This awakening factor enables us to adopt what is to be practiced and avoid what is to be abandoned. So with this awakening factor, then it's easy for us to adopt or practice the things that we want to practice, like wisdom, compassion, love, concentration, and so on. So we can easily put those into practice, and we can avoid the things that we need to abandon, like mental faults and actions that are non-virtuous and harmful. So that's the 7 awakening factors. The next slide is something from Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen's commentary, Ocean of Sport, although he's quoting from Asanga's Compendium of Knowledge. And so this is from the Mahayana point of view, how the Mahayana system understands these awakening factors. And Jetsun Chökyi Gyaltsen in his text didn't elaborate on these, so I don't have additional information besides what's right here. But anyway, I thought it might be good to share it. So it says, the objects of observation of the 7 awakening factors, of the 4 truths of Aryas, or the 4 noble truths. So the 7 awakening factors are focused on the 4 truths: true sufferings, true origins of suffering, true cessations, and true paths. And then he explains how they are cultivated, how you cultivate the 7 awakening factors. So first, with regard to true suffering, by observing true sufferings, all the different kinds of unsatisfactory experiences in our lives, in the world, and so on. So observing those, then one will seek to be isolated from them and then abide there. So we want to free ourselves from true suffering. We want to separate ourselves from true suffering and then remain in that situation, that state of being separated from true sufferings. And then secondly, by observing true origins. So true origins are the origins or causes of suffering, which are mainly the afflictions, especially ignorance, as well as karma, actions that are done motivated by afflictions. So observing those, one will seek to be separated from attachment to them and then abide there, abide in that state of being separated from attachment, no longer having attachment to afflictions and karma that keeps us in samsara. Third, by observing true cessation. So true cessations, the third noble truth, these only occur in the mind of an Arya, someone who's had the direct realization of emptiness. And with that, they're able to eliminate at least some portion of afflictions so that they never arise again. So observing true cessations, one will seek to actualize them and abide there. So what we want to do with true cessations is attain them, make them happen in our mind, and then stay there, not lose them. And then fourth, by observing true paths. So true paths are realizations. They're states of mind that realize things in a correct way. The main true path is the realization of emptiness, but there's other paths as well that enable us to attain true cessations and be free of samsara. So by observing true paths, one will seek to cultivate them and abide there. So anyway, this is just a little more information from the Mahayana tradition about the 7 awakening factors and how they relate to the 4 truths, the 4 noble truths. So that brings us to the end of this topic of the 7 awakening factors. And then we have one more group of harmonies to look at, but we'll do that after the break. It's time for us to have our 5-minute break. So let's stop there and have 5 minutes. Hi everyone again. I think I'll continue now and then I'll stop maybe 15 minutes early and see if there's questions. Okay, so this once again is a chart we've seen before that contains the 37 harmonies with enlightenment. They're grouped into these 7 groups for close placements of mindfulness, for correct abandonings. Those are also called the 4 sublime strivings. And then the 4 legs of magical emanation, 5 powers, 5 strengths. And then the one we just looked at, 7 branches of enlightenment, also known as 7 awakening factors. So we're now up to the last group, which are called the 8 branches of Arya paths. And these are described as completely pure paths of definite deliverance. And the time when they are fully attained is the path of meditation. That's the 4th of the 5 paths after the path of seeing. So this is a very high level of one's practice. And these 8 branches of Arya paths are also known as the Noble Eightfold Path. So you probably heard of those because in the Theravada tradition, they are very, very common. They're taught and they're meditated on. And in fact, the Buddha, in his very first teaching after he attained enlightenment, the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, he first explained the 4 noble truths, and then he explained the 8-fold path. This is the path for anyone who wants to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering and wants to attain nirvana. And so, yeah, we can look at the next slide that lists the eight, yeah, the Arya's Eightfold Path. So they're translated in different ways. This is one translation: right understanding or right view, then 2, right thought or right intention, 3, right speech, 4, right action, and 5, right livelihood, 6, right effort, 7, right mindfulness, and 8, right meditation or concentration. So here they're translated as right, everything is right. Other translations are correct or perfect. It depends on the translator and how they want to translate that particular word. So in our tradition, as we just saw on this chart, it said that these are fully attained on the path of meditation, which is very high along the path, almost to enlightenment. But in the Pali tradition or in the Theravada tradition, these are taught in such a way that one can start to practice them right away from the time you first start following the path. Yeah, so they're taught to people relatively new to Buddhism. And in the book Following the Buddha's Footsteps, the Dalai Lama says, I appreciate the perspective of the Pali tradition in which we begin to practice them now as ordinary beings. In doing so, they will guide our lives until we actually enter the path. And so I thought to first explain these 8 according to the Pali tradition, because that's something, practical, something we can start to understand and practice now. And then later, we'll look at some Mahayana perspectives on these 8. So first, let's just briefly go through these 8. And then later go into them in more detail. So right understanding or right view, this involves understanding karma, cause and effect, how virtue leads to happiness and non-virtue leads to suffering, and also understands rebirth, how we die and take rebirth over and over according to our karma, and also the possibility of attaining liberation and enlightenment. So it's understanding the Buddhist worldview, you could say, how Buddhism explains things, our situation now in samsara, and then the possibility of getting out of this situation and to a state of nirvana, enlightenment. So to develop this understanding, of course, we need to study and think about what we're learning, meditate on it, and gradually develop that understanding. Then number 2 is right thought or right intention. So this has to do with our way of thinking, the kind of thoughts we have, and motivation. What is our motivation for doing the things we do? And so within Buddhism, we need to try to have a positive motivation, non-harmful, not wanting to not harm others, wanting to help others, and so on. So right thought means having positive thoughts, having positive intentions and motivations for the things we do. And then right speech is with regard to what we say, or speech, refraining from speech that is harmful, non-virtuous, and instead speaking in ways that are positive, constructive, virtuous. And then 4, right action. So this has to do with our bodily actions, what we do with our body. And that, right action is to refrain from non-virtuous actions of the body, like killing and stealing and doing actions that are positive and virtuous, like giving, helping others, and so on. Number 5 is right livelihood. So this has to do with how you make your living, how you support yourself. And so we need to avoid certain types of occupations, livelihood, that are harmful, like, killing, killing animals, being a butcher, and so on. And instead engage, have a livelihood and occupation that's at least non-harmful, but helpful as much as possible, like being in the healthcare profession. And then number 6, right effort. So this means making effort to abandon what is non-virtuous, what is the cause of suffering, and practice what is virtuous, what is the cause of happiness. So putting our effort into things that are beneficial, constructive for others and for ourselves. 7, right mindfulness. So this is keeping our mind focused on what we're doing and paying particular attention to keep our mind away from afflictive states like anger, hatred, greed, and so forth, and instead keep it in constructive states of mind. And then number 8 is right meditation or concentration. So this means doing meditation to train our mind in concentration and overcome negative states of mind and cultivate positive states of mind. So bring about a transformation of our mind. So this is the order that the 8 branches. This is the order that the Buddha used when he first explained these in his first teaching. And in one sutra called the Great 40, he said that right view comes first. For example, one needs to know the difference between wrong speech and right speech, wrong action and right action, and so forth. Okay, so we need to first have right understanding before we can then engage in right thought, right speech and action, and so on. So this is, as I say, this is the way the Buddha explained them. And the Dalai Lama says this way of speaking of the these 8 branches or eightfold path gives us ordinary beings clear and easy to understand instructions about how to practice the Dharma in our daily life. But then there's another way of explaining these 8 in terms of the 3 higher trainings. So that's on the next slide. So you've probably heard of the 3 higher trainings. In case you haven't, this is like a summary of the main practices one needs to engage in to attain nirvana, to get out of samsara. So if you hear about samsara and all the problems of samsara and you feel this strong wish to get out, to be free and to attain nirvana, liberation, then what you need to do is summarized in these 3 higher trainings of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And so whether you want to attain nirvana, whether you want to attain enlightenment, you need to do these 3 practices. Ethics is basically about our behavior, how we behave with our body, speech, and mind, and refraining from things that are non-virtuous, harmful, and doing what is positive and beneficial. And then concentration is training our mind to stay on one object as long as possible and not wander here and there. Then wisdom is developing the understanding of how things really exist. So those are the 3 higher trainings, and there's a way of fitting the 8 steps of the Eightfold Path into these 3. So under ethics is right speech, right action, right livelihood. Under concentration is right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And then under wisdom is right understanding and right thought. So let's go through these and look at these 8 points in a little more detail. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so this is the first of the 3 higher trainings, higher training in ethics. And there's 3 of the Eightfold Path included, starting with right speech. So right speech means refraining from the 4 non-virtues of speech, which are telling lies, speaking what isn't true, harsh speech, like insulting people, saying words that are hurtful and disturbing to others. And then divisive speech, which is speech that divides people. So this sometimes happens because of jealousy. There's 2 people who are getting along and have a good relationship, but you're jealous of that. You feel annoyed, resentful, seeing how well they get along, and you want to break them up. And so you might speak to one of them about the other, and saying nasty things or telling stories about them. So any kind of speech that tries to separate people from being friends with each other. And this can also occur not just between 2 people, but 2 groups of people. So this often happens in within a country, like political parties, people speaking badly about the members of another political party in order to create division. And also between nations, people in one nation speaking badly about people in the other nation to create hostility, to create division. So it's the opposite to harmony. Any kind of speech that disrupts harmony, destroys harmony, is divisive speech. And then the 4th is sometimes it's called idle gossip, but I think idle talk is better, because it isn't just gossip talking about people, but it could also be talking about politics or food or movies or things that we are attached to. And this is considered non-virtuous because it can increase our afflictions. It can increase our attachment and our hatred, our anger, our aversion. So it tends to make us more afflicted, more deluded, rather than less so. So those are the 4 types of speech that are non-virtuous. Buddha, these were taught by the Buddha. They come from the Buddha. Those 4 types of speech cause suffering, cause problems. We create negative karma that will bring more suffering in the future. And so we try to avoid those, and we try to speak in positive ways. So instead of lying, we speak the truth. Instead of harsh speech, we speak in ways that are pleasant and agreeable and make people happy. And then instead of divisive speech, we try to create harmony. We speak in ways that will bring people together and have good relationships. And then instead of idle gossip or idle talk, we try to speak in ways that are meaningful. Talking about things that will help people in their, it doesn't mean we always have to talk about Dharma to everybody. Not everyone wants to hear Dharma. But, at least, speaking in ways that will help people be happier and have positive states of mind rather than negative ones, and so on. And then right action This involves refraining from the 3 non-virtues of body, which are killing, taking the life of any other being, even insects, animals, and so on. And then stealing, taking what doesn't belong to us, or not paying money that you're supposed to pay. So if you owe taxes, for example, and you find a way of not paying your taxes, or not paying for bus tickets or movie fares or whatever, that's also included in stealing. And then the third one is sometimes it's called sexual misconduct or unwise sexual behavior, which, you know, an easy way of explaining that is any kind of sexual behavior that causes suffering, like cheating on your partner, or rape, abuse, yeah, forcing someone to have sex against their wish. Yeah, so using sexuality in ways that are harmful. So we try to refrain from those and act in ways that are opposite. So instead of killing, we try to save life, save lives of people and living beings. Instead of stealing, we give, practice generosity. And instead of sexual misconduct, if we use sexuality at all, we do so in ways that are, you know, considerate, beneficial, loving, you know, not using others for our own needs and wishes, not caring about them. And then the third, right livelihood. So the Buddha mentioned certain types of livelihoods that should be avoided. He mentioned 5 things: dealing in weapons, okay? What do they call that? Being an arms dealer. Producing, yeah, both producing them and selling them, because weapons are usually the cause of harm and suffering and death. Then animals for slaughter. So if you raise animals and then sell them to a slaughterhouse, to a butcher shop, but also if you yourself are working in a slaughterhouse or a butcher shop, so you're actually doing the killing. And then slavery, that existed at the time of the Buddha, and it still exists today in some forms, like human trafficking, yeah? Getting human beings and kind of controlling them, not treating them with kindness and love, but yeah, finding ways of controlling them. Like many prostitutes are in that kind of situation. They're kind of, yeah, almost imprisoned and forced to prostitute themselves, and then somebody makes money off of that. So that's still very much alive in the world, unfortunately. And then poisons. So if we produce poisons, sell poisons, use poisons, then that's also harmful, can cause death and suffering. And intoxicants. Okay, so producing and selling intoxicants, because when people get intoxicated, they lose control of their minds, and they may do things that are harmful. Yeah, people kind of get out of control and then behave in sometimes harmful and non-virtuous ways. So those are the things the Buddha mentioned that should be avoided. But we can also use our common sense and maybe come up with other things nowadays that could also be considered wrong livelihoods. And then whatever livelihood we do, whatever kind of job we do have, we should try to behave in ways that are ethical, honest, beneficial, and so on. So yeah, that's also included in right livelihood. And then the little bullet point at the bottom mentions that monastics, that monks and nuns, should avoid, there's another list of 5 wrong livelihoods for monastics, because monastics usually don't have jobs, don't go to work and earn salary. And traditionally, monastics depend on offerings from lay people. So lay people make offerings and donations to support us. And so there's 5 kinds of wrong livelihood that we might use in dealing with benefactors or potential benefactors. So these are hinting. Hinting means not asking directly for something, but dropping hints like, oh, that jacket you gave me 5 years ago was so nice and warm, but now it's falling apart. So, not being kind of direct and honest. And then flattery is when you speak, we know what flattery is, speaking pleasant, complimentary words, but your motivation is not the benefit of the other person, but your own benefit. You want the person to give you something. Then bribery is giving something small in the hope of getting something big in return. You give some very small little gift, like a chocolate bar, a little box of incense, but you're hoping the person will give you a large donation in return. So it's fine to give gifts, give gifts to people, but it depends on our motivation. What is our motivation? Are we really giving, heartfelt way for the other person's benefit, or is it with this hope of getting something from them? And then coercion is putting someone in the position whereby they can't say no, or using our power to influence them. Okay, so if you have some kind of position of power or authority, using that to pressure people so that they will give you a donation. And then hypocrisy is pretending to have qualities that you don't have, like sitting there in a meditation posture, looking completely serene and peaceful, like, you've got high realizations, you're almost enlightened, kind of pretending that. And again, your motivation is hoping that people will be impressed with you and then make donations to you. So these are 5 things that monastics should avoid doing to receive offerings and okay, so that's right. That's higher training in ethics. And then the next of the higher trainings is concentration. And so there's 3 of the 8-fold path factors in this one. Right effort. So right effort means practicing the 4 supreme strivings. I'll remind you of those. We had them a couple of weeks ago. 2 of them have to do with things that are non-virtuous, that need to be abandoned, like anger, for example. So preventing anger from arising in our mind when it hasn't arisen, trying to prevent it from arising in the first place. And then the second one is if it has arisen, so if anger has arisen in our mind, then applying antidotes to it so that it doesn't stay and take over and so on. And then the last 2 have to do with positive factors, like, let's say, compassion. So making effort to cultivate compassion, which hasn't yet been cultivated. Like maybe you feel compassion for some people, but you don't feel compassion for other people. And so you're striving, you're working on increasing your compassion, so you do have it for others. And then the last one, the 4th one, is whatever positive qualities you do already have, making sure that you maintain them and not lose them, not letting them be lost and degenerate. So whatever amount of compassion you have already managed to develop toward a certain number of people, for example, not letting that degenerate, but keeping it up, taking care of it. So those are the 4 supreme strivings. So right effort is putting effort into those. And then right mindfulness means staying mindful of those strivings and practicing the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And yeah. And then right concentration is developing calm abiding, also known as serenity or tranquility or shamatha, the Sanskrit term, and the 4 jhanas, or that's the Pali term. In Sanskrit, it's jhana, and in English, it's sometimes translated as concentrations. So these are beyond concentration. So once you have a really good concentration, like you've attained calm abiding, you engage in further practices to attain these 4 jhanas or 4 concentrations. Each of them has different qualities, different factors. It's kind of a complicated explanation. And so this explanation is in terms of mundane right concentration, but there's also supramundane right concentration. That is when you have the jhanas, you've attained the jhanas, and you're able to conjoin them with wisdom. Wisdom, understanding the true nature of things. Okay, so that leads us to the next of the higher trainings, which is higher training in wisdom. So there's 2 of the 8-fold factors here. Right understanding or right view. So this involves learning the 4 Arya truths, the 4 noble truths, through suffering and so on. So studying those, understanding those, and also learning what is to be practiced, what is to be abandoned. So the Dalai Lama, in the book Following the Buddha's Path, gives some examples of things that lay people or ordinary people can practice with regard to right understanding. He says, understanding that our actions affect others and have an ethical dimension that influences what we ourselves will experience. So not everybody understands that. Not everyone understands that their actions have consequences. There are consequences that will come from their actions, and some of those consequences will be on others. They will affect others. But there's also consequences for ourselves. Things we ourselves will experience in the future as a result of our actions. So not everyone understands that, and that's really important to help people so that they can be more careful about their actions and do the things that lead to happiness, good experiences, and avoid the ones that lead to suffering, problems. And then he says, understanding virtuous and non-virtuous actions and being able to discern the difference between them is essential. As practitioners, we avoid the extremes of indulgence in materialism and in asceticism. So Buddhism is sometimes called the middle way. In the Buddha's own life, he kind of illustrated that. In the early part of his life, he was a prince, and he lived in very luxurious surroundings and had all the possible enjoyments that were available at that time. So he had a very, very luxurious, comfortable life. And then he left that and he kind of went to the other extreme, went out into the forest and just lived out in the open, exposed to all kinds of weather conditions and insects and everything. And then hardly ate anything at all, just ate very, very, very little. It said, 1 grain of rice a day. And so his body just became like a skeleton and he was very weak. And then he realized he went too far. So he said, yeah, the middle way is better. So then he started eating nourishing food again, and that gave him energy to continue his pursuit of enlightenment, and he was able to attain it. So that's part of his teaching, is to avoid those two extremes of indulgence in luxury and materialism on the one hand, but being overly kind of hard on yourself and ascetic on the other hand. And Dalai Lama says, holding the middle way view, we keep our body healthy by eating and sleeping an appropriate amount of time, but not more than is needed. Since our body is useful for Dharma practice, we must care for it wisely without pampering it. So those are just some of the things included in right understanding or right view, like having the right understanding of how to practice, what we should do, what we should avoid doing, and so on. And right view also involves being able to distinguish wrong views. Okay, so we have to have this discriminating intelligence that can recognize what is a correct view and what is a wrong view, because there's all kinds of views in the world, all kinds of ideas that people have, especially nowadays with social media and internet. People can just put out all kinds of information that, yeah, a lot of it is disinformation, a lot of it is just plain untrue. So we have to be able to recognize what is true and what is not true. And then right thought or right intention. Again, this has to do with our thoughts and our motivations. So it involves renunciation, wanting to be free of samsara and all the suffering, as well as the causes of suffering, causes of samsara. And so renunciation, the Dalai Lama describes as a balanced mind, free from attachment. So that's one aspect of right thought, right intention. It's the opposite of attachment, greed, desire, and so forth. And then non-malice is the opposite of malice, hatred, anger, and so on. It could also be expressed as love, benevolence, kindness. And then non-harmfulness. Okay, so that's compassion. Understanding that others don't want to suffer and respecting that, being considerate of that, and then not wanting to do what would make them suffer. Okay, so this is talking about mundane or worldly right understanding and right intention, but then there's also supramundane right views, and these would be the direct realization of the Four Truths, direct knowledge of nirvana, and those are in the minds of Aryas, those who've gained the direct realization of emptiness. So in the minds of Aryas, they have a supramundane level of right understanding and right thought or right intention. Okay, so that's as much as I have prepared for today, believe it or not. And there's a little bit more we'll talk about next week with regard to the Mahayana views of these Eightfold Path. And then that will complete the 37 harmonies, and then I'll go back to the overall structure of chapter 4, and we'll just review some of the main points from that, because that was what this course was about, learning about chapter 4 of the Ornament, but we focused on just one part of that, these 37 harmonies. So there's some time left if anyone would like to ask a question. I see.
Min has his hands up. And he had a question last week too.
Yeah.
Maybe this is it.
Okay. Oh, actually, somebody has a hands up. Just a second.
Sorry?
Oh, should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I have a question. So, one of the questions about being a Buddhist is that, um, is how do you know if you have made it?
Made what?
Basically, made it. I think it's a colloquial term to say that you have like done it and you're on a happy path, or are you doing the right thing, you're on the correct path, because you know um, there are a lot of Buddhist practitioners, and there's a lot of the community is huge, and no one actually has ever claims, the monks and nuns or even lay practitioners claim that they have achieved the path, right? Everyone say that they are very humble practitioner or they're beginner. So if if the Dalai Lama don't say that he has made it, then how do I made it?
Well, for monks and nuns, actually, we have a vow to not talk about any spiritual attainments that we may have attained. So you could talk about them with your teacher, maybe with a few close companions on the path, but not to, publicly proclaim that you have realizations. So this was actually laid down by the Buddha. This was one of the vows or precepts we have, and I think, if I remember correctly, the reason for this is, if somebody talks about a realization that they have, then the lay people will get very excited and want to make lots of offerings to that person, and then they won't make offerings to others who didn't have those realizations. And so it can become a little bit like a circus, maybe. And then maybe some people, some monastics who aren't so honest, might claim that they have realizations in order to get more offerings, more attention, more fame, and so on. And so, yeah, it could become something quite messy. And then how do people know who has realizations and who hasn't? If all these people, and this is in fact the case in the world today, there are people who claim that they have realizations, they have this power and that power, and they've talked to the Buddha and they've talked to Padmasambhava, and it's and people believe them. And I think I'm sure many of these people are kind of, I don't know if they're deluded or they're lying, but it's, yeah. So that, yeah, it can get quite messy. And so you can tell, though, just by a person's behavior, you can tell if they're really on the path and doing well in their practice and succeeding in their practice. So Actually, the Dalai Lama, it's interesting. Just in the last couple of years, I didn't hear this before, but in the last couple of years when he's teaching, he talks about realizations that he has had. He said, what does he say? Sometimes he says he's attained the path of accumulation, which is the first of the 5 paths. And that is attained when you have uncontrived bodhicitta, spontaneous bodhicitta, meaning you're a bodhisattva. And he also has said he has realized emptiness, but not yet directly. He hasn't yet gained the direct realization of emptiness. So it's kind of surprising to hear him talk about that, given that, we're not really supposed to talk about realizations. But I wonder if he does that because he wants to encourage people. Because he talks about how he gets up every morning very early and he meditates on bodhicitta and he meditates on emptiness. And he's been doing this for years and years and years. He's done lots of study, lots of practice. And so I think he's trying to encourage people that if you practice, you can gain these realizations too. So it's kind of making people hopeful that it is possible to gain these realizations. Yeah, so yeah, there may be people who claim to have realizations, but we shouldn't just believe if someone says they have a realization, we shouldn't just blindly believe that, but we should watch them, observe them, see how they behave, and if they really are behaving properly or not, then that's a good sign that, yeah, maybe they do have realizations. But if they say they have a realization, but we see them manipulating people and using money, sex, power, there's people like that out there. So we do have to be careful.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Jessica, you had a question. You're muted.
Jessica?
Okay, sorry, I'm muted. I have my own question, but now I'm kind of interested in Ming's question as well. And I heard him ask it how a person will know if they've had a realization as well. So I'm wondering about that. Like, how would I know if I were to ever have a realization?
That's a good question, and I'm sorry I didn't answer that. Well, one way that people use is to go to their teacher if their teacher is still alive, and they have some kind of experience and they think this might be a realization. They will go to their teacher and explain it to their teacher, and then the teacher, if the teacher has a lot of experience in meditation and knows the path very well, then they would be able to say, yes, that is a realization, or no, it's not. Because there are, people do sometimes have experiences that may be really amazing, and they may think that is a high realization, but it may not be. So it is good to check with a teacher. On the other hand, if someone is very, very knowledgeable about the path and knows the signs, the indications of realizations, if they have that kind of knowledge, then they can recognize that themselves on their own. And but to get that kind of knowledge, they must have relied on teachers. They must have had teachers guiding them, and good knowledge of the Buddhist scriptures.
So it sounds like you would need a good level of knowledge as well to realize that you have had a realization.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm organizing information in my mind, and when I heard you talking about the branches of Arya path, and then relating it to also the Eightfold Path, there's a list that goes through from 1 to 8, and I'm organizing them as there's number 1 is the first, and you have to have number 1 to get number 2. But when you talk about the 3 higher trainings, wisdom comes third in the columns, and organizing it so that wisdom would be third. Does this make sense? So ethics would be speech, action, livelihood, then concentration, and then wisdom. But for the Eightfold Path, the understanding and thought are number 1 and 2. I guess maybe I don't need to frame things in this way as being sequential, and maybe that's just how I'm organizing information, but I'm curious about this.
Well, I think, I'm not completely sure, but this order that I just went through, where they're divided into ethics, concentration, and wisdom, I think that may be the order that's more appropriate for people who are just beginning to practice. Yeah. So at the beginning of our practice, we are encouraged to refrain from non-virtuous actions of body and speech and livelihood. Okay, so that's kind of doable for most people. Whereas right understanding is something that takes time, because you have to listen to teachings, you have to think about them. And for a lot of lay people, like in many in Buddhist countries, a lot of people don't have that much time, to learn and study. So that's a little bit more advanced. So that's what, yeah. And then concentration really comes before wisdom. They go hand in hand, but to really have wisdom, strong wisdom, you do need good concentration. So that order is more in terms of ease of practice, ability to practice. Whereas I'll look into this, I'll try to find more, but I think the Buddha spoke about right view first, because he said it's important to have a correct understanding of right and wrong, what is right, what is wrong. And so a certain amount of right view would be needed even to practice right speech and right action and right livelihood. You have to know what constitutes right speech, what constitutes wrong speech, and so on. So you have to have a certain amount of right view, right understanding, even to be able to do those practices. I don't know if that's helpful or not. So, I think there are different ways you can arrange these 8 points from different perspectives and in different situations. But I'll try to find more about that and bring it next week.
Thank you.
So I think we've reached the end of our time. We have a few minutes left to do the prayers, the dedication prayers.
May the world be happy, the years good, and grains increase, the Dharma flourish, every happiness and bliss arise, and every wish in the mind be fulfilled. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Long life prayer of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And His Holiness's the Dalai Lama's prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratika Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, together with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Munis' precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience, that is never discouraged, incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request, while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, especially Venerable Sangye Khadro. We appreciate you teaching us so much.
Thank you, Effie. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
So if
all.
you have any questions, send them to Effie and I'll try to answer them next week, or bring them yourself to the next class. That'll be our last one.
Oh,
Next
Thank
week is
you.
the last class. Yeah. Night.
good night.